Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. I've decided to take a break from the awful bore of purchasing more land and diversifying my property portfolio in order to bring my loyal fans another deep dive into an often largely forgotten retro gaming classic. In between my attempts of world domination and being a family man, I have been searching through the archives at Top Hat headquarters for something to quench my thirst for cartoonish violence and challenging gameplay. Eventually I stumbled across an entry to an iconic series that provided the perfect blend of both of those qualities and had somehow escaped the attention of most casual retro gaming nerds out there. Naturally, I thought this would make for an ideal candidate for a thoroughly good investigation conducted in the time-honoured Top Hat way. And let me tell you now, this game has been way more influential than what many people may think, and deserves way more respect than that of the series killer label that is often affixed to the game. So without further ado, go grab your cup of Earl Grey and sit in your comfiest of chairs as we explore the criminally ignored, yet ridiculously important, Battletoads Arcade. Yeah! In the year 1991, seemingly the entire Western world was obsessed with the radical crime-fighting reptiles known as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Those that can remember this gnarly era will be able to recall that the heroes in house shells were absolutely everywhere, with cartoons, comics, computer games, action figures and even foodstuffs all carrying the official Ninja Turtles branding at the time. This huge display of popularity meant that the series was a prime inspiration for publishers and developers of the time, all looking to piggyback off of the pizza-munching sewer dweller's image and notoriety. One such attempt came from a now very familiar face: the immensely influential British computer game design studio Rare, the future creators of the Donkey Kong Country series, Banjo-Kazooie, Killer Instinct, GoldenEye and more. They decided to have a go at capturing the tubular energy of the Turtles. The team, spearheaded by national treasures Tim and Chris Stamper, landed on the notion that their squad of mutated hero creatures would be composed of a group of toads. These anthropomorphic monstrosities, who were intended to shift bucket loads of merchandise, were originally titled Amphibians, before they were given the moniker Battletoads, just to hammer home how kick-ass these creatures really were. The Battletoads' debut on the NES in 1991 was incredibly well received on the whole, with the only potential issue being the perceived immense difficulty of the game. This did not prevent it from being ported numerous times in the years following release, appearing on consoles such as the Sega Mega Drive, Game Gear and Amiga to name a few. Battletoads has a great blend of vivid cartoonish graphics with an amazingly catchy soundtrack, supporting an incredibly solid gameplay experience. To distinguish itself from its contemporaries in the field of beat-em-ups, Rare decided to dial back on weapons-based violence, but encouraged liberal use of giant fists with which to defeat enemies. Alongside this abandoning of weaponry, Battletoads also included unique stages such as the infamous Vehicles section, which still makes many gamers rage here in 2022. Whilst there certainly are some frustrating sections, I have completed it over 100 times with one hand tied behind my back while blindfolded, but no one hears me complaining about difficulty. I suppose I am just that damn good. The ultimately positive reception to the original release led Rare to come to the conclusion that they had a potential multimedia phenomenon on their hands. A cartoon series was planned in conjunction with Dick Animation City, the creators of the excellent Street Shark series. A pilot episode was in fact made, but it received a lukewarm reception and thus a full season was never commissioned. The pilot was released on VHS and it eventually surfaced on YouTube many years later, making for rather fun viewing some 20 years after its creation. Alongside this failed attempt at dominating the animation world, many more Battletoads games were developed by Rare over the years for home consoles. Sequels such as Battletoads in Battlemaniacs and the ambitious Battletoads Double Dragon crossover were released to varying degrees of success, and a remake of the original game was made for the Game Boy. But in 1994, Rare decided to do something away from the home console market, and attempted to enter the lucrative world of arcade gaming. Thus, Battletoads Arcade was born. Battletoads Arcade, also known as Super Battletoads, was published by a small company who few have probably heard of, known as Electronic Arts, and it once again starred everybody's favourite trio of arse-kicking amphibians. However, this entry to the franchise would see Rare implement many changes in order to capture the hearts of the notoriously fickle arcade gamers. The storyline, much like many of its arcade peers, was not as fleshed out as previous entries released on home consoles. It basically boils down to the Battletoads looking to stop their arch nemesis, the Dark Queen, from destroying their universe. Fairly routine as storylines go, but as mentioned previously, this is rather par for the course in the world of arcade gaming, and not something to be overly critical of. After all, who has time for storylines when you are spending precious coins retrieved from parents, looking for 5 minutes of peace away from their offspring? Not this tycoon, that's for sure. Battletoads Arcade gave fans the chance to play through the 6 levels of mayhem alongside 2 of their friends. The players would control 1 of 3 Battletoads available, each of whom possess different fighting styles, special moves, and offer different gameplay experiences. Rash is an agile toad who relies on speed to overwhelm opponents. The bulky and imposing Pimple is the tank of the team, slow but immensely strong. And finally there is Zitz, who is the most balanced of the 3 selectable characters, offering both reasonable speed and power. The delightfully named trio work in tandem to take down a whole host of intergalactic enemies, whilst also offering the potential for frustrating friendly fire causing accidental game overs, testing the strength of many friendships and the wallets of multiple parents. With this newfound move towards cooperative gaming, Battletoads Arcade also looked to move beyond its rather toned down and PG approach that the series had somewhat famously adopted at its beginning. The design team had come to the conclusion that the family-friendly approach to cartoonish violence would not persuade many mid-90s teenagers to part with their precious pocket money, and so the designers set about adding the ability to decapitate enemies with punches, as well as adding a whole host of weaponry with which to batter aliens senseless. Mortal Kombat has a lot to bloody answer for. With the decapitation and weapons came rather gory amounts of blood, however this could be turned off by more conservative arcade operators. It can also be argued that the presentation of characters such as the Dark Queen was far more sexualized in this iteration of Battletoads. Another attempt by the developers to catch the attention of horny teenagers who dealt in the arcades of the era, and a firm display of the move away from family-friendly entertainment. Much like the original Battletoads, the arcade entry attempted to set itself apart from its beat-em-up rivals by offering a somewhat unique approach to level design and structure. Some of the levels utilise a 2.5D style similar to the Double Dragon games, a nod to their previous collaboration in the crossover title that we mentioned earlier. There is also a level where the titular heroes are descending from a height using jetpacks, using vertical movement for progression rather than the traditional horizontal layout. These variations in level design arguably peak with the last of the 6 playable stages, which takes place with the Battletoads firing plasma rifles from an aircraft that moves throughout the level. These rather well designed and interesting stages are perhaps one of the most bizarre collections of levels ever assembled in an arcade cabinet. Because of the alternative universe outer space setting of the game, there is seemingly little rhyme or reason behind the overall themes and designs of the stages. One minute you are descending a huge throat-like cavern with a jetpack, and the next you are battling oversized rodents and snowmen in a winter wonderland complete with Christmas motifs. It's a wonderfully crazy collection of ideas, but it does feel somewhat thrown together. And the Christmas level in particular seems as though it was taken from some other unfinished game and dumped into this one. Whilst variety should always be celebrated, it should also feel purposeful and organic, not like some hodgepodge patchwork blanket hastily stitched together in order to provide warmth in the face of rising energy prices. I'm not sure who's worse, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Vladimir Putin. Either way, I just want cheap bloody petrol. Just as you would expect from an arcade beat-em-up, each of these strange and fantastical stages comes complete with a boss fight as its conclusion. These include a wide cast of characters from the wider Battletoads universe, such as General Slaughter and the giant snake Knarf. Each of these boss fights provide quite the challenge, as there is a real sense of achievement obtained once you defeat one. Sometimes you're rewarded for a particular excellent completion score, with that all-time classic arcade game trope, a bonus round. These brilliantly lampoon one of the most famous bonus stages in all of gaming, the car smashing round found in Street Fighter II and its various iterations, which I must point out was in Final Fight even prior to Street Fighter II. This time you're attempting to destroy various spacecrafts within the time limit, thus proving that these amphibians are as tough and destructive as Ryu and his mob. To develop these weird and wonderful stages, the team at Rare had begun to experiment in 3D graphics and textures. They decided to implement some of these ideas in Battletoads Arcade, which can be seen in the rather glorious display that is present in the game. The levels are vivid and the character models look very slick for the era. Rare used the development suite Power Animator to create the polished visuals, becoming the first Rare game to use the tool. When I mentioned earlier that this game is extremely important to gaming history, well, this is why, as this would be the very first time the technology would be used that was used extensively in the development of their later titles such as Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country, both of which received a plethora of praise for their design and graphics, earning their spots as legends. Battletoads Arcade never quite hit the heights that its console predecessors had done in the years prior. The game was fairly well received during playtesting and its initial release, but the sales were mediocre at best. Reviewers at the time, such as Allgame, noted that whilst the graphics were extremely vivid and enticing, the game was just too similar to its predecessors, thus making it feel a tad dated. This tepid reception from critics and gamers led to Rare abandoning two ports of Battletoads Arcade, one for the Super Nintendo and the other for the Game Boy, with the Super Nintendo edition already having at least one level completed at the time of cancellation. Eventually the public would receive a home console port of the game in Rare Replay, which was released on the Xbox One some 21 years later in 2015. This time around it was much more well received, eventually being lauded by many to be the finest entry in the series of all. The ultimate commercial failings of Battletoads Arcade meant that the series was put into hibernation, leaving most fans of the terrifying trio reminiscing about the difficult but satisfying adventures they had played during their childhood. Pair all of this with the ridiculous levels of success Rare would find with Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, and the insane amount of high quality games they developed for the Nintendo 64, Rare eventually entered a new stratosphere, and a franchise that in many ways emulated the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a brand that was in itself resulting in diminishing returns by the mid-90s, it would seem like Battletoads' time was up for good. But as we now know though, they were never to truly be put out to the pasture, as eventually the franchise was rebooted 26 years after the demise of the arcade game, and the new edition released to a reasonable reception in 2020. Once again, critics said the game was potentially a little too difficult for some newcomers to the series, showing that even after 26 years of inactivity, Battletoads still manages to divide opinions and punish gamers relentlessly. But to get a true perspective on that one, I intend to cover it on here in the future. As many of you have probably noticed by now, I try my best to cover entire series of video games on here. Speaking of which, I believe it has been a couple of years now since I have talked about the Battletoads. So if you want to learn even more about the franchise, be sure to check out my range of previous videos, looking at the original Battletoads, Battletoads in Battlemaniacs, and Battletoads and Double Dragon. There is plenty of retro gaming and beat 'em up content that may interest you on here. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the story of a forgotten entry in the Battletoads franchise. It does not deserve the label of series killer, and is in fact a fairly decent arcade outing that functioned as a key building block in the creation of both Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct. In my opinion, it's certainly worth a play for any long-time Rare fans who managed to miss this the first time around. And it is easily accessible thanks to that Rare Replay collection we mentioned earlier. Give it a try for yourselves and see where those iconic Rare visuals started to take shape. Yeah! Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment and ring that notification bell, and give thanks to the wonderful people who help make these videos possible via supporting the channel on Patreon. Shout-outs go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paula Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey Marsh Sr., Ron Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Nanth, Azra Rakai, Joaquin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang-hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee, Marvin Liga, TOG Driver, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bowell, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, and everybody else who backs what I do over on Patreon. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it, but I will say thank you. Yeah, cheerio.